The day Catherine Hargrove's husband changed the locks, he told her she had nowhere to go and that nobody would hire a 53-year-old woman who hadn't worked in 15 years. He said it loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. He was smiling when he said it. What Daniel Hargrove did not know, what he could not have imagined standing on that Boston sidewalk in his expensive coat with his 26-year-old girlfriend watching from the doorway, was that Catherine was about to descend into a world the city had buried and forgotten since 1948. And that somewhere in the darkness beneath those old cobblestone streets, behind a rusted panel in a wall that nobody had touched in over 60 years, was a sealed vault containing the precise documents that would dismantle everything Daniel Hargrove had spent 21 years building. He thought he had destroyed her. He had, in fact, handed her the key to his own destruction. But this story is not really about destruction. It is about what a woman discovers about herself when everything else is taken away. And that part is far more interesting. Stay with this, because what Catherine built in the dark, and what she chose to do with what she found there, will change how you think about survival, about patience, and about what it means to treat another human being as though they do not matter. Catherine Hargrove had been a graphic designer before her marriage. A good one, not famous, not wealthy, but genuinely skilled, with a portfolio that included 2 regional design awards and a client list she had built from nothing over 7 years in her 20s. She had her own studio apartment in Cambridge, a car she had paid for herself, and a habit of working until 2 in the morning on projects she cared about, which was most of them. She met Daniel at a client dinner in 2001. He was 42, a commercial real estate developer, the kind of man who entered a room and immediately located its center and moved toward it. He was charming with the particular quality of charm that is partially genuine and partially strategic, and Catherine, at 32, did not yet have sufficient experience with that distinction to tell the two apart. They married in 2002. She was happy in the early years in a genuine, uncomplicated way that is possible when the compromises have not yet accumulated into something too heavy to carry. Daniel traveled constantly for work. He was generous with money. He was attentive when he was present, which was the problem. Attentiveness in intervals is easy to maintain and impossible to evaluate accurately. The decision to stop working was never a single decision. It was a series of smaller ones, each of which seemed reasonable at the time. Daniel's schedule was unpredictable. Someone needed to be available. His client dinners required a certain kind of hosting that a full-time career made difficult. When they moved from Cambridge to Beacon Hill and then to the larger house on Commonwealth Avenue, each move required time and attention. And then Daniel had suggested, gently, that the income from her design work was not really necessary, that she was putting in the effort for what amounted to supplementary income, that it might be worth considering what she could accomplish if she directed that energy toward their shared life instead. Catherine had believed him because she had loved him and because she had not yet understood that our shared life and my life were, in Daniel's calculation, the same thing. She stopped taking clients in 2009. By 2012, her design software was 3 versions out of date, and her professional network had thinned to a handful of people who remembered her from before and occasionally sent work that felt like charity. By 2020, Catherine Hargrove had not professionally designed anything in 11 years. When Daniel told her he wanted a divorce, he did it the way he did most things he considered unpleasant, efficiently, with the assistance of professionals. His attorneys had been preparing for 8 months before he said a word to her. The house on Commonwealth Avenue was in a trust that predated the marriage. His investment portfolio was similarly structured. The vacation property in Vermont was held in his mother's name. Layer by layer, his lawyers demonstrated that what Catherine had believed was a shared financial life was, legally, almost entirely his. The settlement awarded Catherine $90,000 in 60 days to vacate a house she had lived in for 17 years. She stood on the Commonwealth Avenue sidewalk on a Wednesday morning in November with a single suitcase, a cat carrier containing her tortoiseshell cat Pepper, and a bank account containing $87,000. Daniel stood at the front door while the locksmith worked. His new girlfriend, a woman named Ashley who worked in his firm's marketing department, waited inside the hallway in Catherine's peripheral vision. "You should have had a better lawyer," Daniel said pleasantly. He was in good mood. This was always when he was most dangerous in his good moods. The settlement was more than fair given what would you call it? Your lack of contribution. Catherine said nothing. She had been married to this man for 21 years. She knew that responding was what he wanted. "Ashley and I are going to Nantucket this weekend," he continued. "I thought you should know, since I know you liked it there. You'll probably want to find somewhere more within your means going forward." He paused. "I heard 2-bedroom apartments in Somerville are very affordable. You might want to look there." He meant this as an insult. He delivered it with the careful casualness of someone who has been thinking about it for some time and is now pleased to release it. Catherine picked up her suitcase, picked up Pepper's carrier, and walked down the Commonwealth Avenue sidewalk. She did not look back to see if he was watching. She had made that mistake enough times in the last 20 years, turning around to check whether she was still being thought about, and she was done with it. She walked for 3 hours without a clear destination. $90,000 sounds like money until you are 53 years old in Boston with no recent employment history, no references whose opinions Daniel hadn't already shaped, and a rental market where a studio apartment in a neighborhood she could tolerate cost $3,200 a month. At that rate, her settlement ran out in just over 2 years. At that point, she would be 55, with no income, no portfolio, and no professional identity that any hiring manager would recognize. The math was simple, and it was brutal, and Catherine knew it as she sat on a bench near the Fens in the early November afternoon, letting Pepper out of her carrier to breathe and pressing her hands against her knees to keep them from shaking. "We have a problem," she told the cat. Pepper put her paw on Catherine's hand. "I know you agree," Catherine said. "That doesn't help." She was in the old financial district near downtown, the streets around Devonshire and Milk that had been the center of Boston's banking world before the center shifted, and these blocks became a mixture of converted office buildings, law firms, and the kind of restaurants that serve expensive lunches to people with expense accounts. After 5 o'clock on a weekday, the area emptied with the efficiency of a place that has nothing to offer after business hours. Catherine was looking for a place to sit and think when she noticed the grate. It was set into the sidewalk near the corner of Devonshire and Water, almost completely obscured by decades of accumulated grime and the kind of weeds that grow in urban concrete with stubborn indifference to everything around them. A sign, barely legible behind oxidized metal, read, "Metropolitan Transit District, Service Access, Authorized Entry Only, 1933. Catherine had read, years ago in some article she half remembered about Boston's urban history, that the city's original subway system had been significantly rebuilt in the 1940s and 50s, leaving behind sealed stations that still existed under the streets, intact and unused and forgotten. The article had included photographs, white tile, brass fixtures, the preserved aesthetic of 1930s public architecture. She had found it interesting the way you find things interesting when they have no bearing on your life. She crouched and examined the grate more closely. The padlock that was supposed to secure it had corroded to a condition that was more decorative than functional. She pressed the shackle with her thumb, and it moved without resistance. Catherine looked up and down the street. It was 5:47 in the afternoon. There were 4 people visible in either direction, all of them moving purposefully away. She thought about the $90,000 and the 2-year math. She thought about Daniel's voice saying, "You're a lack of contribution." She thought about Pepper in the carrier, watching her with the focused attention of a creature that trusts you entirely and has no backup plan. She opened the grate. Concrete stairs descended into darkness. Cool air rose from below, not cold, not damp, cooler than the November street above and dry in a way she hadn't expected. She took the small flashlight she had always carried in her purse. Her practical upbringing in Western Massachusetts had made certain habits permanent. Clicked it on and went down. 31 steps. She counted them. At the bottom, the flashlight beam fell on a corridor of arched white tile, cracked in places but structurally intact, running ahead into darkness. The ceiling was 8 feet high. The floor was concrete, dusty with decades of stillness, but solid. Catherine moved forward slowly, testing each step, and the corridor opened into a space that made her stop and stand still for a full 30 seconds. A subway platform, fully intact, perhaps 200 feet long, tiled in white and accented with the particular deep green of the 1930s WPA aesthetic, the era when public buildings were designed with the conviction that people who used them deserve beauty as well as function. Brass light fixtures hung from the arched ceiling, their bulbs gone, but the fixtures themselves clean-lined and elegant. Vintage advertisement panels still occupied their original positions on the walls. A Coca-Cola illustration, a war bond poster, a shoe company's logo, and the confident sans serif typography of the period. Catherine stood in the flashlight beam and understood that this space had not been touched since approximately 1948. It had been sealed when the MBTA reconfigured the lines, and for 76 years it had simply waited undisturbed beneath the city. She walked the length of the platform. At the far end, a door marked Station Operations opened into a series of smaller rooms. One clearly a storage space, one containing old equipment too rusted to be identified, and one that was 12 feet by 14 feet, tiled, dry, with a door that closed on working hinges and a brass fixture on the ceiling that would once have held a light. Catherine set down her suitcase in Pepper's carrier. She opened the carrier. Pepper stepped out, sniffed the floor in a circle, and looked up at her. "I know," Catherine said. Pepper began exploring the perimeter. "You're right," Catherine said. "It's solid." She sat down on her suitcase and shone the flashlight around the small room. The tile was dusty but undamaged. The floor was clean beneath the dust. The door, when she tested it from the inside, could be secured with a simple bolt. For the first time since Wednesday morning, possibly for the first time in much longer, Catherine felt the particular quality of silence that is not absence but presence, the silence of a place that belongs to no one and therefore could belong to her. No one was watching. No one was judging. No one was keeping score. She was underground in an abandoned subway station with a cat and a suitcase and a flashlight. She was also, she noticed with some surprise, no longer shaking. She made her bed on the floor that night from clothes in her suitcase. It was not comfortable. It was not cold, either, which surprised her. The underground temperature held steady at around 60 degrees. Pepper settled against her legs and purred with the reliability of a small machine designed for exactly this purpose. Catherine lay in the absolute dark and listened to the city above her. Faint vibrations, occasional distant sound from the active MBTA lines nearby, and thought with unexpected clarity about what came next. She was not going to leave. Not yet. Maybe not until she had a better plan, and a better plan was going to require time, which was the one resource that living here without rent would give her. She slept 9 hours. The days that followed had the quality of a problem being methodically solved, which was, Catherine came to understand, what she did best. She had spent 21 years solving problems for Daniel's household, organizing their social obligations, managing their various properties, running the infrastructure of a wealthy family's life, and she had done it invisibly and without credit because that was how it worked. But the skills were real. She established systems. The first day, she mapped the neighborhood above. A diner on Franklin Street with a single-occupancy bathroom she could use in early morning. A laundromat 3 blocks east. The Boston Public Library branch on Essex Street, 4 blocks away, with electrical outlets and bathrooms and computers and the particular privacy of a public space where no one looks at anyone else too closely. A 24-hour CVS for immediate necessities. A market basket 8 blocks away for food. She spent carefully. Battery LED lanterns, rechargeable power banks, a portable camping stove, water purification tablets, a water filter rated for backcountry use. She bought a month's supply of cat food and litter. Total first week expenditure, $240. She had saved $2,960 in rent. Water was the first engineering problem. The ceiling pipes, old steam infrastructure from the building above, disconnected but still conducting atmospheric moisture, condensed in the temperature differential between the underground air and the metal surface. Every morning, water collected in droplets along their undersides and fell to the platform floor. Catherine positioned clean containers beneath the most productive drip points and collected, over 24 hours, close to 2 gallons. Through the camping filter, it was clean. The system cost nothing to operate. Lighting came next. 8 power banks, rotated between the station and the library in pairs, kept her LED strip lights powered indefinitely. She carried 2 to the library each morning, charged them while she read or worked at a computer, and returned underground each evening with full batteries and 6 more in reserve. The library staff noticed nothing. People charge phones there constantly. Catherine was invisible in the most useful sense. Food storage required creativity. The underground temperature was naturally refrigerator adjacent. 60 degrees held most perishables safely longer than they would have survived in an unrefrigerated space. She supplemented with an evaporative cooling box she built from a milk crate, wet burlap, and a circulation point in the tunnel's airflow. It was not a refrigerator. It was sufficient. She began recovering food. Bakeries near closing time, produce with cosmetic flaws from the market basket's reduced price section, the day-old pastry shelf at the coffee shop on Arch Street that put its unsold items out at 8:15 each evening in a paper bag marked "Take Me." Catherine had been raised to believe that waste was a moral failure, and that pride was the thing that convinced you to go hungry rather than use what was available. She went to the pastry bag without embarrassment. She went to the reduced produce section without looking around to see who was watching. Nobody was watching. And if they were, she did not owe them her suffering. Within 6 weeks, she was spending less than $450 a month on everything. Her settlement, instead of lasting 2 years, could last 17 years if she needed it to. She did not need it to, but the cushion changed everything about how she could think. The transformation of the station happened the way most of Catherine's best work had always happened, gradually, with complete attention, one section at a time. She started with the tiles. The platform walls were original 1933 subway tile, the cream-white base with a deep WPA green accent at shoulder height, and along the lower panel, a geometric border pattern in terracotta and gold that she suspected very few people had ever truly looked at, even when the station was operational. Decades of sealed air had protected the glaze. Beneath the grime, which was dust and the residue of sealed years rather than water damage or biological growth, the tile was intact. Catherine cleaned it with the thoroughness of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. She worked section by section, 6 feet at a time, spending hours with cleaning solution and soft cloths and old toothbrushes for the grout lines. It was meditative in the precise sense of that word. It required enough attention to quiet everything else, and it produced visible results that accumulated. When a section was clean, Catherine would stand back and look at it. The original designers had cared about this space. They had chosen these colors and this pattern in the belief that the people passing through it, the office workers, the shop girls, the laborers, the whole mixed human traffic of a working city, deserved a beautiful place to wait for their trains. That conviction was visible in the work, and cleaning the work revealed it again after 76 years. Catherine photographed each section before and after, not for any audience, but because the documentation felt important. This was what she had always done with design work she cared about. The platform became her primary living space over the following weeks. She furnished it with the particular skill of someone who had spent 21 years making interiors beautiful on varying budgets and who understood that beautiful objects are produced in every economic stratum and that most of what ends up on the curb marked free ended up there because the owners moved, not because the objects failed. She found a mid-century leather sofa on Marlborough Street on a Thursday morning, set out with a free sign by someone who was clearly renovating. It needed cleaning, and the cushion covers needed replacing, which she did with fabric she found at a Goodwill on Washington Street. The result was better than the original. She found a round brass side table at an estate sale on Newberry Street where everything was marked 30% off on the last day, and the dealers had already taken what they wanted. She found bookshelves, actual built-in wooden shelves, removed during a renovation and left in pieces in an alley on Otis Street, which she reassembled with screws and appropriate brackets and installed along one wall of the platform, creating a library. Books she found everywhere, outside the library's monthly paperback sale, in the free boxes that appeared on sidewalks throughout the city whenever people moved. Within 3 months, she had over 200 books on those shelves. She found art, a framed oil painting of the Boston Harbor, Victorian era, slightly damaged at one corner, but otherwise beautiful, left outside a frame shop on Tremont Street. A series of botanical prints. A large abstract that someone had painted and then apparently reconsidered, left in a cardboard tube by a dumpster on Boylston Street. She hung them on the tiled walls with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where each thing belonged. The small tiled room became her bedroom. The mattress she had eventually sourced from a furniture consignment shop on Cambridge Street. A good one, a solid mid-range mattress that someone had replaced with a platform bed frame and therefore no longer needed. She had it delivered to the building above the grate, paid a delivery worker $20 to help her get it down the stairs, and had slept on an actual mattress since the 3rd week. The station manager's office became her design studio. She had bought a used laptop, $380, adequate for what she needed, and had begun working again, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Her design software had an affordable subscription version. Her eye had not changed. If anything, it had sharpened. She began taking small freelance projects through an online platform, working under her maiden name, Hargrove Design. The rates were modest, and the clients were not the kind she had worked with in 2001. But the work was real, and it was hers, and with each project she rebuilt something that Daniel's divorce settlement could not quantify and had not tried to take. She also began writing, not for publication, for herself, in a journal she kept in the desk she had found. She wrote about the station, about what she was learning in it, about the specific skills of surviving with precision and creativity, about what it felt like to be invisible to a city and what that invisibility made possible. She wrote about what she understood now, about the 21 years of her marriage that she had not understood while she was inside them. She wrote about Daniel without anger, which surprised her. She wrote about him with the clarity of someone who has achieved sufficient distance to see the shape of a thing. The maintenance worker came on a Tuesday evening in February, 3.5 months after Catherine moved in. She heard the tunnel door first, a sound she had learned to distinguish from the vibrations of the active lines and the settling of old structure. She extinguished her lights in the 3 seconds between hearing the sound and seeing the flashlight beam coming along the tunnel from the north entrance, and she sat in absolute stillness behind the sofa with Pepper held against her chest. The light swept the platform. It found her space, the clean tile, the furniture, the library wall, the evidence of sustained and careful habitation, and stopped moving. A voice. Male, genuinely surprised. What on earth? Catherine stood up slowly, Pepper still in her arms, hands as visible as they could be while holding a cat. I can explain, she said. Please don't call anyone. I'll leave if I have to. I just need a few days to find somewhere else. The worker turned his flashlight so it was no longer pointing at her face. He was perhaps 32, wearing an MBTA utility uniform and carrying a clipboard that he appeared to have forgotten about. His name tag read, Tom Aldrich. He looked at her. He looked at the platform. He looked at her again. You've been here how long? 3.5 months. He walked slowly onto the platform, examining the clean tile, running his hand along the wall, looking up at the brass fixtures. He stopped at the library wall and looked at the books for a long moment. "The Cavendish station," he said. "That's what this one is. I've done safety checks on 4 abandoned stations in this system. They all look like crime scenes, water damage, structural failure, animal habitation." He turned to look at her. "This one looks like a museum." "I've been cleaning it," Catherine said. "I can see that." He sat down on her sofa with the absent-minded ease of someone who doesn't realize they're sitting down until they've done it. Then he looked at the sofa, apparently noticing it was a very good sofa. "I'm supposed to report unauthorized occupancy." "I know," Catherine said, "but what I'm technically required to report is safety hazards." He looked around the station. "You are not a safety hazard. You have, if anything, reduced the safety hazards that were here when this station was last inspected." He looked at her carefully. "Are you okay? Are you safe? Is there someone?" "I'm fine," Catherine said. "I'm safer here than I was at home." She told him a short version. The divorce, the settlement, the math, the grate. Tom Aldrich listened without interrupting, which was more than most people did. When she finished, he said, "My grandmother raised 4 kids after my grandfather left. People treated her like she was invisible, like she'd become a non-person because she wasn't attached to a man anymore. She used to say the hardest part was being looked through, not looked at." He stood up. "I'm going to file my inspection report. It's going to say the Cavendish station is structurally sound and requires no immediate attention." He pulled a card from his clipboard and handed it to her. "My cell number. If anyone else from maintenance shows up down here, call me first. I'll come." He looked at the platform one more time. "Seriously, this is extraordinary." After he left, Catherine sat in her dark station for a long time. She had been prepared, fully prepared, to lose this too. She had been carrying the readiness to lose it the entire 3.5 months. The way you carry an umbrella in a city where rain arrives without warning. The fact that she hadn't lost it did something she hadn't expected. It didn't make her feel victorious. It made her feel, for the first time, that she was allowed to care about this place, that it could be more than temporary shelter, that she was permitted to call it, quietly and without drama, home. The leak in the far utility room was the reason she found the vault. It had been there since her first week. A slow seep through a crack in the north wall of the second storage room. Not enough to threaten the space, but enough to leave a damp stripe on the tile and concern her. She had been patching it with hydraulic cement, which held for a few weeks and then released. On her 4th attempt, she decided to trace the leak to its source, which required removing the metal panel that covered the lower section of the north wall. The panel was held by 4 corroded bolts. She worked them free over the course of an afternoon with a socket wrench she had found in a toolbox in the first utility room. The panel came away from the wall in a shower of rust dust, and Catherine stepped back to let the air clear. Behind the panel was a cavity in the wall, perhaps 18 inches deep by 4 feet wide. Inside the cavity, set flush with the interior masonry, was a vault door. It was compact, roughly 2.5 feet square, with a combination lock dial of the mechanical type that belonged definitively to mid-20th century manufacturing. The door itself was steel, dark with oxidation, but structurally intact. The handle did not move. Catherine sat on the floor of the utility room and looked at it for a long time. The building above the Cavendish station had been, until 1974, the headquarters of the Alderton Federal Savings Bank. She had read this in the historical documentation she had found in the station manager's office, a laminated pamphlet from the 1940s describing the station and its connection to the financial district. Alderton Federal had failed in 1973 in a bank run connected to a broader regional financial crisis. Its assets had been acquired by a larger institution. Its records had supposedly been transferred. Supposedly. A sub-basement vault in a station that had been sealed since 1948 and that nobody in the intervening decades had thought to check would not be in any transfer manifest. Records placed in it after the station closed, or before, would simply not exist as far as anyone keeping inventory was concerned. Catherine did not sleep well for the next 3 days. She went to the public library and read everything available about Alderton Federal Savings Bank, about the 1973 banking crisis in New England, about the bank's principals and major clients, and about the mechanics of mid-20th century bank vault combination locks. She learned the vault was almost certainly made by Diebold, the dominant manufacturer of the period, and that Diebold's factory default combination from the 1940s and 50s were documented in a safe-cracking manual that had been published in 1981, digitized, and was freely available to anyone who knew to look. She printed the relevant pages at the library. There were 94 default combinations listed for Diebold models from the relevant period. Catherine worked through them systematically, one per evening, recording each attempt in her journal. She brought a good headlamp for the vault work because it required both hands. On the 58th attempt, the dial moved with a distinct click that was different from all the previous clicks, and a handle turned, and the door opened. Inside were 8 metal file boxes, stacked in 2 columns of 4. They were sealed with simple latches, not locked. Catherine opened the first one. Financial records, ledgers, correspondence, account statements, all from Alderton Federal Savings Bank, covering the period 1968 through 1973. Standard banking documents, the kind that would have been entirely mundane in context. Except that as Catherine worked through the first box, and then the second, she began to understand that these were not standard banking documents. These were the records that the bank's principals had specifically chosen not to transfer when the institution failed. The ones they had sealed away in a place they apparently planned to retrieve and apparently never did, because the plan had assumed they would still have access to the building above, which they had lost along with everything else. The third box contained what she had begun to suspect existed by the time she opened it: a set of client accounts, maintained separately from the main ledgers, documenting the movement of money through a structure that appeared designed to obscure the source and destination of funds. The clients were identified by code, not name, but the correspondence in the fourth box identified the codes. She worked through the night and most of the following day. The scheme was not complicated in concept, though the execution showed competence. Certain clients, wealthy, mostly in real estate and construction, had maintained accounts at Alderton Federal that were not reported to the IRS. Money came in as loans, was held, and went out as investment returns or consulting fees, creating the appearance of legitimate transactions while sheltering the original income from taxation. The bank had charged substantial fees for this service. The total funds moved through the system between 1962 and 1973 were documented in the ledgers and added to approximately $31 million in 1970s dollars. Among the client codes, when she cross-referenced the correspondence, was one that appeared 47 times across the records. The name attached to it was Hargrove Development Associates. Catherine stared at this name for a long moment. Hargrove was her name, her married name, but Hargrove Development Associates was not a company she recognized from her marriage to Daniel. She read more carefully. Hargrove Development Associates had been incorporated in Delaware in 1966. Its principal was listed in the Alderton Federal Correspondence as one Edward Hargrove, Daniel's father, a man Catherine had met twice, once at the wedding, once at a Christmas dinner in 2005, before he died in 2008. A commercial real estate developer of the previous generation, from whom Daniel had inherited both the business and, apparently, certain practices. The account records for Hargrove Development Associates showed transfers totaling $4.2 million over 11 years, none of which appeared in any tax filing Catherine could locate in the public records she subsequently researched. After Edward Hargrove's death, the account had simply been sealed here, behind the panel, in a vault that nobody checked. But the records did not end with Edward. A separate set of documents, filed in the seventh box, showed that Hargrove Development Associates had not dissolved. It had been reorganized and reactivated in 2003, the year after Catherine's marriage, under new management. Daniel Hargrove, principal, and the transactions that followed, documented in an entirely different set of records that appeared to be copies made for personal protection by someone within the bank's successor institution before certain records were destroyed, showed that Daniel had continued what his father had started, with more sophisticated instruments and larger amounts. The copies ran from 2003 to 2012. The amounts documented: $17.6 million in funds that had not been declared. Catherine sat in the vault room in the beam of her headlamp and held this information. She photographed everything. 4,200 photographs, taken over 3 days, organized by box and document number into folders on her laptop, backed up to 3 separate cloud services. She read every page before she photographed it. She made notes in her journal. She was not angry. She noticed this. She thought she should be, and she understood why she wasn't. 21 years of marriage to a man who managed emotions the way he managed money, strategically, with an eye to their utility, had taught her that anger was information, not action. What she felt was something more like the clarity that arrives when a long confusion is resolved. She understood now, with documentary precision, the financial architecture of a life she had lived. That was useful. Anger was not yet. She spent 6 weeks reading and researching before she did anything with what she had found. She read about tax fraud and the statutes of limitations. She read about the IRS whistleblower program, which existed to encourage exactly this kind of disclosure and which provided financial incentives to informants, typically 15 to 30% of the assessed tax recovery. She read about divorce fraud, about what happened when a spouse concealed assets during divorce proceedings. She consulted an attorney through a secure contact form on a law firm's website, using a hypothetical framing. If a person discovered documentation of their ex-spouse tax fraud after a divorce settlement based on fraudulent financial disclosure, what were their options? The attorney's response was thorough. The divorce settlement could be challenged. Assets hidden during the divorce and from tax authorities could be seized. A portion of any IRS recovery could be awarded to the reporting party. And criminal charges for divorce fraud were separate from tax fraud charges and could be pursued independently. Catherine spent those 6 weeks not only reading, but also making a decision about what kind of person she wanted to be on the other side of this. She thought about Daniel, not about what he had done, which she understood, but about who he was, which was a more complicated question. He was a man who had learned certain things from his father about how to move money and whom to treat as having value and whom to treat as having none. And he had applied both lessons consistently throughout his life. He had applied the money lessons to his clients and the value lessons to Catherine, and in both cases the lesson was the same. Some people and things were worth protecting, and others were resources to be used until they ran out. She had been the second category. She knew that now, without the distortion of grief she had carried for the first months. She knew it clearly, and she was done being angry about it. But she was also done with it costing her nothing. She sent the first package to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in April, 6 months after moving into the Cavendish station. Inside, a summary document she had written herself, 340 pages, organized chronologically and by transaction type, with every claim supported by a specific document reference. Attached, 60 pages of the most significant source documents, with document numbers corresponding to the digital archive she had created and would provide upon request. She included a cover letter. It was 1 paragraph. It said that the enclosed materials documented tax fraud committed by Daniel R. Hargrove and Hargrove Development Associates over a period of 19 years, that the total undeclared income was approximately $21.8 million, that the documents had been located in a sealed vault in a building at a specific Boston address, and that she was prepared to provide full cooperation and complete document access to any authorized investigation. She signed it with her name and a secure email address she had created for the purpose. The second package went to the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, with similar documentation focused on the state tax implications. The third package went to her divorce attorney, a woman named Helen Marsh who had represented Catherine as well as the settlement allowed, which was not well because Catherine had not yet understood during the proceedings what she was dealing with. The package included the documentation of Daniel's hidden assets and a request to reopen the settlement proceedings based on fraudulent financial disclosure. Helen Marsh called Catherine's cell phone 14 minutes after the package arrived. "Catherine, where are you?" "I'm Fina. I'm in Boston. The documents you sent me. I need to understand where these came from." "I found them," Catherine said, "in a place nobody had looked for a long time. The IRS has already contacted my office. They received the same package." "I know." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Catherine, this is what you've found here is the financial implications for the divorce settlement are significant. If even a portion of this is verifiable, which it appears to be, you were defrauded in the settlement proceedings to a degree that absolutely supports reopening the case." "I know that too," Catherine said. "Are you working with a criminal attorney?" "Not yet. I'm open to recommendations." Helen gave her 2 names. Catherine wrote them down in her journal. Then she made herself dinner on her camping stove in her underground kitchen and ate it on the platform sofa with Pepper beside her, reading a novel she had found in the station manager's office. A paperback from 1967, slightly foxed, still entirely readable. She was calm. She had done what needed to be done, and it had been done carefully and thoroughly and at the right time. And now it was in other people's hands, which was where it belonged. She learned about the federal charges from the Globe website on a Wednesday morning at the library. The headline was at the top of the business section. "Boston developer faces federal tax fraud charges." The article was thorough. IRS agents had executed search warrants at Daniel Hargrove's offices in Post Office Square and at the Commonwealth Avenue house. His accounts had been frozen pending investigation. He was facing charges under multiple tax fraud statutes with potential penalties of up to 25 years and fines exceeding $8 million. Daniel's attorney had issued a statement. Catherine read it twice. Then she closed the browser and went to look for books. Her divorce attorney filed to reopen the Mitchell settlement that afternoon. The case moved quickly once the criminal investigation became public, as these things do when the underlying fraud is documented in 4,000 photographs organized by a former graphic designer with a precise and systematic mind. The settlement negotiations lasted 4 months. Catherine never appeared in person. She communicated through Helen and through her new criminal attorney, a man named Philip Torres who had spent 18 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office before going into private practice and who, when Catherine laid out her documentation in his conference room, sat in silence for several minutes before saying, "This is the most organized evidence package I have ever seen from a non-lawyer." "I have time," Catherine told him, "and I know how to organize things." The new settlement awarded Catherine $6.8 million in cash and assets, including the Commonwealth Avenue house. Daniel's remaining wealth was consumed by legal fees, the IRS recovery process, and the civil penalties that accumulated alongside the criminal proceedings. He entered a plea agreement in November that resulted in a 4-year sentence and a fine of $3.2 million. Catherine did not attend the sentencing. She did not need to. She had already decided what she was going to do with the money, and it did not require his presence to proceed. She bought the Cavendish station. Not easily. The process of purchasing a decommissioned MBTA facility required navigating city council approvals, historic preservation designations, and a real estate transaction that her attorney described as unprecedented on 3 separate occasions. It took 11 months. It cost $1.9 million. Tom Aldrich, the maintenance worker who had given her his card 9 months earlier, wrote a letter to the Historic Preservation Board on her behalf, describing the station's structural integrity and the work that had already been done to restore its original tile work. The board's chairperson, a woman named Patricia Holloway who specialized in adaptive reuse of historic urban spaces, visited the station and spent 2 hours walking its length before calling Catherine's attorney and saying she would personally expedite the designation. The renovations took another 14 months. Catherine hired an architect named James Whitmore who had done similar work on an abandoned textile factory in Lowell and who walked into Cavendish Station for the first time and stood at the end of the platform for 5 minutes without speaking. "You cleaned all of this yourself," he said finally. "Over several months," Catherine said. "One section at a time." "With what?" "Toothbrushes." "Mostly, yes." James Whitmore looked at the tile for another moment. "We're not touching this," he said. "We're going to work around it." They installed proper electrical infrastructure, plumbing, ventilation, and accessibility modifications without altering the original tile work, which was designated as a protected element of the historic structure. They added a discrete entrance through the building above, which Catherine purchased separately for $800,000 and renovated as a ground floor gallery and event space. They built studio spaces in the utility rooms. They converted the platform into a performance venue with proper acoustics and seating. The Cavendish Center opened the following April. The architectural press was interested. 3 magazines ran features within the first 6 months. The Globe did a long piece on what they called adaptive reuse at its most extraordinary. Catherine gave interviews carefully, describing the discovery of the station and her vision for its future, without mentioning the months she had spent living in it. Those months belonged to her. She had kept the small tiled room exactly as it was. The mattress, the desk, the shelf of books, the brass fixture overhead. She went there sometimes in the evenings when the center was closed, and she sat in the quiet and thought about what it had been like to be there with a flashlight and a cat and nothing else, and how that had felt and what it had produced in her. She had kept Pepper's water bowl in exactly the spot where she had always put it. Pepper, now 8, slept in the center director's office most days and had become, in the way of cats who occupy interesting public spaces, a fixture that visitors asked about and that Catherine refused to explain fully. The letter from Daniel arrived 14 months after the sentencing. It came through his attorney to her attorney, formally, which was the only channel that existed between them. It was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged that what he had done during the marriage and the divorce was fraudulent and wrong. The second was an apology, specific, not general, which she had not expected. He named things: the public humiliation on Commonwealth Avenue, the settlement he had engineered to strip her of what was rightfully hers, the years in which he had dismissed her work and her judgment, the particular cruelty of saying, "Your lack of contribution," on a sidewalk while a locksmith worked. The third paragraph asked for nothing. It did not ask for forgiveness. It did not ask for a response. It said only that he understood if she chose not to reply, and that whatever she chose, he wanted her to know that he recognized, clearly and without the rationalizations he had spent 20 years constructing, what he had done. Catherine read the letter in her old tiled room, sitting on the desk chair with Pepper on her lap. She thought about it for 3 days. Then she wrote back. She wrote 2 paragraphs. The first said that she received his letter and that she believed it was sincere, which she did. The second said something she had been thinking about for a long time, something she had worked out in her journal over the months underground, writing about Daniel not with anger, but with the particular honesty that solitude produces. She wrote, "I've been thinking about what it means to forgive something. I don't think it means what most people say it means. I don't think it means pretending it didn't happen or that it didn't matter. I think it means deciding that you're not going to let it be the thing that determines what you do next. I made that decision some time ago. I made it in a place you know nothing about, in the dark, alone, and it was the best decision I have ever made. So yes, I forgive you for my own reasons and in my own terms. I'm not asking you to understand what those are. I'm just telling you that I do." She sent it and did not wait for a response because she did not need one. The letter was not for Daniel. It was for her. 2 years after the center opened, Catherine stood on the performance platform during an evening concert, a jazz quartet, the sound moving through the tiled space in the particular way that the geometry of the station amplified and shaped it, which James Whitmore had predicted and which was even better than predicted. The platform held 220 people. Every seat was occupied. Pepper sat on a chair in the back row that was permanently reserved for her. Catherine stood near the tunnel entrance and looked at the space. She thought about what it had been when she descended into it. The darkness, the dust, the preserved advertising posters, the beautiful neglected tile, the small room with the bolt on the door, the condensation water dripping into containers, the library she had built from other people's discarded books. She thought about what it required of her to build it. Not the money or the renovation, but the months before any of that, the months of solving problems with what she had, which turned out to be more than she had been told. The ingenuity, the patience, the willingness to be wrong about the approach and try a different one. The discipline of doing each thing precisely, because precision was what she had instead of resources. Daniel had told her she lacked life skills. She had spent 21 years half believing him. It had taken the removal of everything else to understand that what she had was not a lack of life skills, but a life that had not yet required her to use them. She thought about the people who had helped her. Tom Aldrich, who had looked at a woman living in an abandoned station and seen a person who deserved the chance to keep what she had built. Philip Torres, who had treated her evidence with the seriousness it deserved. Helen Marsh, who had been angry on Catherine's behalf in the ways that Catherine had not been able to afford to be during the proceedings. James Whitmore, who had understood immediately what the tile was and what it required. She thought about the vault, about the Alderton federal records, about what it meant that the evidence of Daniel's fraud had been sitting in a wall beneath a city street for 60 years, waiting for someone to find it. She thought about what Nathan Bowman had written in his Trading Post journal, which she had read about in an article about a foundation in Maine built by a couple who had bought an abandoned structure for $3, an article that had been shared around her email list by Patricia Holloway after she read it. I am in the business of hospitality, which is different from charity. Charity is given to people as lesser. Hospitality is offered to people as equal. She thought about what she wanted the Cavendish Center to be. She had been thinking about this since before the renovation was complete. The performance space and the gallery and the studios were the public face. But there was a back office that nobody used yet, and a budget line item she had included that the accountant had flagged as unusual. She had explained it to the accountant the way she was going to explain it to the board at the meeting next week. The Cavendish Center would offer studio space at significantly reduced rates to women over 50 who were reestablishing professional practices after career interruptions. Graphic designers, illustrators, writers, photographers, creative professionals who had paused their work for the reasons these pauses happened and who needed not charity but a foothold, which was different. They would get space and equipment and Wi-Fi and access to the center's professional network. In return, they would contribute 8 hours a month to the center's programming, teaching workshops, mentoring younger artists, participating in the public events. Not charity, a transaction between equals, in which both parties gave and both received. The center would also maintain a separate resource fund, small grants, $2,000 to $5,000, for women in the specific situation Catherine had been in. The sudden financial emergency, the gap between what existed and what was needed, the period when what you required was not pity, but a fixed point, a place where someone would be there. The jazz quartet moved into a long, improvised section, the bass line running beneath the piano's upper register in a conversation that filled the tiled platform with something that sounded exactly like what it was. People who trusted each other completely, making something together that neither could have made alone. Catherine listened. She had been thrown away. She had landed in an underground space that nobody valued and that turned out to contain exactly what she needed. Not the vault, not the money, though both had mattered. What she had needed was the time and the solitude to understand what she was made of, which turned out to be more than she had been told. She had been told for 21 years that she lacked things: contribution, skill, value. She had absorbed more of that than she had known, which was why the months underground had been necessary, to strip everything away until what remained was just Catherine, solving problems with what she had, building something beautiful in the dark. She was not going to let any woman who came through the Cavendish Center's door be told, in any form, that she lacked anything. She was going to treat each of them as what they were: a person with a complete history and a set of capabilities that their circumstances had not yet required them to fully use. That was the lesson the station had taught her. Not about money or revenge or patience, though it had taught her all of those things too. The lesson was simpler and harder than any of those. The lesson was that what you are is not determined by what has been done to you or taken from you. It is determined by what you build in the dark, when no one is watching, with what remains. The jazz quartet finished. The audience applauded with the particular warmth of people who have received something they had not expected. Pepper, in the back row, lifted her head and looked around with the dignity of a creature who lives in a beautiful place and knows it. Catherine smiled. She had found her tunnel. She had built her palace. And now she was leaving the light on for whoever came next. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below what stayed with you. Whether it was the moment Catherine lit that first lantern in the dark, the night she opened the vault, or the letter she wrote to Daniel that asked for nothing and gave everything. We believe stories like this matter because they remind us that the people we dismiss, the people we try to reduce to their circumstances, are carrying capabilities and histories that we have no right to underestimate. The next time someone is going through something hard, ask yourself whether you're looking at them or through them. That distinction is everything. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.